So can somebody put the house lights up for a moment? How many people here are entrepreneurs who've started their own business? Okay. How many people inherited a business? Okay. How many people married into a business? Okay. How many people here think they have enough money for the rest of their life? Oh, wow. Okay. How many people think that they are to spend a lot of part of their life giving away their money? How many people are involved in philanthropy? Okay. How many people get greater pleasure out of making money than giving it away? Okay. How many people get greater pleasure out of giving it away than making it? Okay. So let me tell you my views on these subjects. Thank you. You can turn the lights down a moment. I am by background a lawyer, and let me describe how I got into what's called the private equity business and how I'm now really trying to spend most of my life giving away all of my money, which is something I never thought I would do when I was growing up. And let me describe what happened. I am a person who grew up in Baltimore, United States, in Baltimore, Maryland. My parents were not high school educated. They never graduated from high school. I grew up as the only child, and my goal was to get a scholarship to college, and I did. I got one to Duke University, and then I wanted to become a lawyer and serve my country because I was inspired by John Kennedy. Some of you may remember, if you're old enough, that he gave a great speech on January 20th, 1961, in which he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And inspired by that, I said as a young boy, I want to help my country. So ultimately, I figured I would do that by becoming a lawyer and going into government. And so after law school, I went to work in a law firm in New York with a man who wrote that speech for John Kennedy, a man named Ted Sorensen. And I practiced law for a while, and I said to my colleagues, I think I might go to Washington to go into government and serve my country, and they suggested it was a good idea because it was clear to them I wasn't a very good lawyer. I said to my clients, I might go to Washington, and they said that's a good idea. So I got the hint that I wasn't a good lawyer. Ted Sorensen, the great former speechwriter for John Kennedy, got me a job working for a man he said would be the next president of the United States. His name was Senator Birch Bayh. It was 1976. I joined his operation, and 30 days later, he dropped out. So I said, uh-oh, this is not a very good career. I wasn't a good lawyer. Nobody in my law firm thought I was very good. I joined a presidential campaign, and the man drops out after 30 days. So some of you may have had experience where you thought your whole career was going to end. Anybody ever had that kind of experience before where you thought your career was going to end? I thought mine was going to end at the age of 26. And then I got a call out of the blue, as some of you may have had at some point in your life, where somebody asked you to do something you didn't expect to be asked to do, and I didn't know the person who made the call. They said, would you like to work for somebody else who's running for president? I said, okay, who is it? They said, Jimmy Carter. I said, isn't he that peanut farmer from Georgia? They said, yes. So I took the interview. I had nothing else to do. I got the job, and I joined the campaign in 1976. And when I joined Jimmy Carter's campaign, he was 33 points ahead of Gerald Ford. And when I was finished my work, Carter won by 1 point. So Carter often said, what was your contribution? But as we've all learned over many years, White House jobs are not filled on merit. They're filled on who worked in the campaign. So I got a job as the Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor to the President of the United States at the age of 27, 3 years out of law school. I have an office in the West Wing. I'm flying around on Air Force One, going to Camp David, going on the helicopter Marine One with the President. Unfortunately, one of my jobs was to fight inflation. I got it to 19%, so that wasn't very good. Nobody has done it since then. People used to come to me all the time in the White House and said, you're a bright young man, and when you want a job, call me up. Well, I figured I would be the senior domestic advisor in the second term if Carter was reelected, and I was going to just stay in government and serve my country, trying to get inflation lower if I could. And we lost the election to Ronald Reagan. So I said, uh-oh, I'm out of a job, but I'm going to call all the people who told me what a bright young man I am, and they're going to hire me. I called them for 6 months, and nobody would call me back. Why? Because when you're out of power in Washington, you're a dead man. As Harry Truman said, if you want a friend in Washington, buy a dog. So I couldn't get anybody to hire me. Finally, some law firms felt so sorry for me. One, they hired me at the very bottom. I had to start all over again. And I started practicing law again. All of a sudden, I realized that I wasn't very good at it. If you're not loving what you're doing, you won't be good at it. I didn't love practicing law, and my clients didn't love my practicing law either. They suggested I do something else. So I was inspired by two things to get out of the practice of law, and it changed my life, and maybe you've had a similar experience. I read that a man named Bill Simon, who had been the Secretary of Treasury under Gerald Ford had started a buyout firm. I didn't know what a buyout was, and he had done a deal where he bought Gibson greeting cards and essentially put $1 million of his own money in, and about 2.5 years later, he made $80 million. I thought that was better than practicing law. So I said, I got to figure out what a buyout is. And then I was starting to think maybe I'd start my own buyout firm in Washington, D.C. There had never been a buyout firm in Washington, and I really couldn't get it put together yet. But then I read that an average entrepreneur will start his or her first company between the age of 28 and 37. And after the age of 37, your chance of starting a new company goes down, just like a woman's biological time clock goes down, your entrepreneurial ability to start a new company goes down after 37. And I read that when I was 37. So I said, I better do something. So I recruited 3 guys who actually knew something about finance, and I told them I had mumbled I had some money, we were going to do buyouts. When they joined, I said, well, I meant to say I was going to get the money. I didn't really have it yet. In 1987, I raised $5 million, and that was for the entire company. Today, we manage about $200 billion, and we're one of the largest private equity firms in the world. And it's been very successful, and we managed to do this. As all of you who are entrepreneurs know, you have to do something different, something that nobody else has done. And what we did is we institutionalized the business. We took a mom-and-pop business called private equity, and we made it more institutional, and then we globalized it. And by doing that, we were able to grow this small organization to a global organization. And then when I turned 54, Forbes magazine kind of outed me. They said, well, look what these guys at Carlyle have done, and look what their net worth is. And so my children and my relatives and my friends began to see that I had made a lot of money. And I realized that, yes, I had made a lot of money. And then I realized, reading that I had, at the age of 54, I had lived 2/3 of my natural life, my actuarially expected natural life. So I said, okay, I've got all this money, what am I going to do with it? Well, I could be buried with it like the pharaohs were in ancient Egypt, take the money and be buried with it, but there's no evidence you actually need it in the afterlife, so I decided that probably wasn't a good idea. I decided I could then, I could give it to my executor, and my executor in my will, he would give it away, but it wasn't clear that I would be in a place where I could see where it was going when I was dead. So I decided actually I'd like to give away the money while I was alive. And the question is, as all of you know, giving away money sounds easy, and people make jokes about how easy it is, but it's not that easy. It's a lot harder than you might think. And I wasn't quite sure which way I would go, what I would do with the money. So I, of course, like all of you, I'd give money to my schools and hospitals and other kinds of things like this. But then something changed my life that I want to describe to you, and I'd like all of you to think about something like this for yourself. I was coming back from London, and I was I live in Washington, but I was going to New York, and I was reading my mail, and it said, you're invited this evening to a viewing of the Magna Carta in New York. I said, how can you have a Magna Carta viewed in New York? It's in London, I assume, somewhere. But I got there, I went to Sotheby's. I'm not an art collector, and I'd never been to Sotheby's before. The curator said, well, actually, there's 17 copies of the Magna Carta. There are various versions of it. 15 are in British institutions, 1 in the Australian Parliament, and there's 1 that was owned by Ross Perot, the only one in private hands. It's going to be sold by Sotheby's tomorrow, and it's probably going to leave the United States because we know who the likely buyers were. So right then and there, I said, okay, I'm going to buy this copy and give it to the United States government as a gift to the country, because this document was the inspiration for the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and I just think it should stay, at least one of the 17 copies should stay here. So I changed my schedule. I went back the next day to Sotheby's. I didn't tell my wife I'm going to buy the Magna Carta. It seems presumptuous to say I'm going to go buy the Magna Carta tomorrow. And I didn't want to tell my children. They'd say, how much less money might this mean for us? So I didn't say that. So I went there. I got there right before the auction, and they put me in a little room. I thought it was locked in. I didn't know why I was in this little room. They picked up a phone. They said, just listen. And if you've ever been to an auction, you know you get carried away. So I started to get carried away, and I'm bidding, and all of a sudden, they said sold. So I figured I couldn't hear very well. Somebody bought it. The curator came in and said, you just bought the Magna Carta. You won. I said, but who are you? We don't really know you. I described who I was. He said, okay, you have the money for this, right? Yes, I do. So I bought it, and they said, well, you can slip out the side door. Nobody will ever know who bought this, or you can tell these 100 reporters here. And I said, no, I would like to tell them. And I went out and said, I came from very modest means, and I want to give this back to my country as a down payment on my obligation to give back to my country for the good fortune I've had. And so I did that, and now I got into the habit of buying other historic documents that remind Americans of our cultural tradition, our legal tradition. So the rare copies of the Declaration of Independence, rare copies of the 13th Amendment that's freed the slaves, rare copies of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and put them on display so that Americans can learn more about their history. It turns out that Americans know very little about their history, and I suspect many people in countries know very little about their history. In our country, it turns out that more high school sophomores can name the first 3 names of the 3 Stooges than the first 3 names of any founding fathers. And it turns out that when a survey of Americans was asked, what river did George Washington cross during the Revolutionary War, 35% of Americans said the Rhine River, which happens not to be in our country. So 25% of Americans recently could not name the Vice President of the United States, and nearly 50% of Americans could not name the 3 branches of our government. So my theory is try to get these documents in front of people, get people to learn more about history, and give back to the country that way. And then another thing happened that changed my life. When I was out of town one day, there was an earthquake, and the Washington Monument had some real earthquake damage. So I came back and said to the head of the National Park Service, which controls the Washington Monument, tell me what it costs to fix it. I'll put it up. Don't wait for the government. It'll take forever to get the bureaucratic money to do this. And so he said, okay. And he told me what it cost, and I said, fine, I'll put up the money. He then later said, well, the Congress now got upset that you're going to get credit for doing something good. They don't get credit for doing anything. Can they put up half the money? I said, okay, fine. So I did. And then they actually asked me if I wanted to go to the top of the Washington Monument. It had scaffolding, and so the head of the Park Service said we were going to go to the top. I'm happy to do it on the outside. There was an elevator. The head of the Park Service, the head of the Secretary of Interior said, I'm a mountain climber, and I would be humiliated to take this elevator up. Let's climb. I said, well, I'm not a mountain climber. I wouldn't be humiliated. She said, I've climbed Mount Rainier 7 times. I said, I've flown over Mount Rainier 7 times. I said, is there a defibrillator somewhere? So they found a defibrillator, so I climbed up. I got to the very top, and it's the greatest view you ever see in Washington, 555.5 feet up, and I put my little initials in there. So there's a little graffiti at the top. If you ever get to the Washington Monument, you'll see my initials there. And I now have tried increasingly to restore other kinds of things in Washington or around there that remind people of American history. So Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home, or Montpelier, James Madison's home, the author of the Constitution, or Mount Vernon, or other kinds of things. And recently I just announced that I was going to help restore the Lincoln Memorial, which needs some restoration, and put an underground education center there. So I've called what I'm doing by buying historic documents, getting people to know more about our history, and getting more monuments done to let people know about our history, something called patriotic philanthropy, which means really just giving back to our country and trying to remind people of our tradition. But anybody in any country can do the same thing. And it really reminded me that life is really very short, and if I had just kept making money the rest of my life and be buried with a lot of money and a high net worth, would I be a happier person, and would the world be a slightly better place? All of us are on this earth for a very short period of time. If you're fortunate, maybe you'll make it to 80, 90, 100 years, but the truth is, it's a very short life. And if you just accumulate money for the purpose of accumulating money, I don't think life is as satisfying. It's interesting, the test I use is what I call the mother test. When I was building my company, became one of the largest in the private equity in the world, my mother never actually called me to congratulate me. She knew what I was doing. Every time I give away money or do something to help my country, she calls me to say she's actually proud of me. So my test is actually whether your mother is proud of you, which is a tradition that's a difficult test maybe for some people to meet. Some mothers are never going to be proud, perhaps, but my mother is finally proud of what I'm doing, and I think that it's not her test that's the most important. It's whether I feel that I'm doing something useful with my life. Now, philanthropy is an ancient Greek word. It means loving humanity. It doesn't mean rich people writing checks for other causes that are good causes. It means helping humanity. So if you don't have money, you can do it with your time, your energy, your ideas, whatever it might be, but try to do something to make the world a slightly better place. Humans are different than all other mammals on the face of the earth because we have a sense that there's some purpose to our life, and we're supposed to do something to make the world a better place. And I don't really think it's good for anybody to get to the end of their life, they're on their deathbed, and say, well, geez, I wish I had done something for my community, my society, my country. They should do it while you're younger. Don't wait as long as I did. Try to get it done earlier, and try to instill in your own children the sense that life is more important than just making money, buying cars and houses and planes and boats. Life is much more important than that, and you can actually be a better human being and make the world a slightly better place if you care about other people. And there are many different ways to do it, but you have to find something that makes you inspired to do something that you really are passionate about. All life is really a matter of being passionate about something if you're really going to enjoy life, your business or your philanthropy. And so increasingly I found that this is what I want to do. When Bill Gates called me and said, would I sign the giving pledge, which means you're going to give away half your money, I said, yes, I would do that. And I was one of the first 40 people in the world to do that. But actually, I'm going to give away all my money on the theory that my children inheriting a large sum of money isn't going to necessarily make them a better person. I think they've agreed with that. You may have the same kind of experience with your own children. And so what I'm trying to do now is to tell to other people who are business people, all of you here are in the upper 1/10 of 1% of your society, whatever country you're from. You wouldn't be at this session if you weren't a very wealthy person. And I think all of you should try to think about what you're doing to make the world a slightly better place other than just by paying taxes or building your company. Those are very nice things as well. But I think if you can try to think of some philanthropic thing that you can take as your own, make it your own. It can be a very small thing in your society. It can be a large thing in your country. But do something that you have a passion about. Because if you do that, I think you'll have a greater life on this face of this earth. Now, I also think that if you give away money, you might observe other things. One of the great philanthropists live a long life. So I have a theory that God looks favorably upon philanthropists. So if you want to do something that preserves your life, give away some of your money. You're likely to live longer. Now, why is that? That's because I think when people give away money or do things for other people, they're happier. And happier people live longer. Grumpy people don't live long. How many grumpy people do you know that made it to 80 or 90? Happy people live longer. I also think there's a special place in heaven reserved for people that are involved in philanthropy. Now, I can't prove that, but why would any of you want to take a chance that I'm wrong? Now, let me mention one other piece of philanthropic things that I did that I will close on that some of you may find interesting. It turns out that when Richard Nixon went to China in 1972, he brought back 2 pandas. And some of you may remember this. He brought back 2 pandas to the Chinese. They were given to the United States government. Since then, the Chinese government has recognized that pandas, which are only from northern China, are very valuable tools of diplomacy, and people would like to see them. And there are 27 zoos in the world that have pandas. And now you rent them from the Chinese for $1 million a year, a male and a female. And the rent is really paid, the fee is paid to help with what's called panda conservation. Let me explain what that means. On the face of the earth now, we have about 10 million species. 99% of all the species who've ever existed on the face of the earth are extinct. A species usually lasts about 500,000 years. So 99% of all the species that have ever existed are gone. There are about 10 million species left. Humans are one. There are 7.5 billion of us. The pandas are another species. There are only 1,600 pandas. Now, why are there 7.5 billion of us and only 1,600 pandas, and why are they so popular? Well, all of you have seen pandas. They're very cute. They sit there. They eat bamboo all day. Nobody really feels that they're hurting anybody. So they're very popular. At the Washington National Zoo, where there are now 2 pandas, they are the most popular part of Washington, D.C. In fact, when our government has its perpetual shutdowns, nobody complains. They only complain about the fact that the Panda Cam, which shows the movies of what the pandas are doing full time, that's shut down as well. So the Smithsonian, which I'm a regent of, owns the National Zoo. And when the Smithsonian found that they didn't have any sponsors to pay the $1 million, I said I would help with that. And so I got very involved in learning more about pandas. And all of you should think about the poor problems the pandas have. Why are there so few pandas? Well, there are 300 in captivity, and there's 1,300 in the wild. Pandas live alone. And depending on whether you believe in God or evolution, the panda is able to reproduce only 4 hours a day, 1 day a year. So the female goes into estrus and can only reproduce for 4 hours a day, 1 day a year. So how does this happen? Well, in the wild, the panda will leave a scent on the tree. A female will leave a scent saying, in 3 weeks, I'll be ready to mate. The male will pick it up, the scent. He'll leave his own scent on the tree saying, in 3 weeks, I'll be there. 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week. Well, they get together, but if you only do this 4 hours a day, 1 day a year, you don't know how to do this very well. So the parts don't go where they're supposed to go. And the result is there aren't that many pandas. So in captivity, what they do is they show them movies of pandas mating. And it's called panda porn. And the pandas look at this, and what they do is they kind of say, they look like they have big eyes, but they're really small, and their brains are not as big as you might think. They have big heads, but small brains. So they don't get the idea. It doesn't have the same effect as humans watching a similar kind of thing. So So what they do is they often have artificial insemination. Because I put up the money in the Washington National Zoo, they said, would you like to see the artificial insemination of the female when this happens, when they put them together and they don't really do what they're supposed to do naturally? I said, I don't think I want to see that. They said, would you like to see the semen extracted from the male? I said, absolutely, I don't want to see that. But sure enough, they put them together a few months ago, and they fought for a while, and then they artificially inseminated, and then baby panda was born, and now we have a new baby panda in the National Zoo. I think this is very important. I try to remind people because it reminds me of our Congress in the United States. Our members of Congress know what they're supposed to do, but they don't know how to do it. And the pandas know what they're supposed to do, but they don't know how to do it either. So what I am now trying to do is make sure that pandas know what they're supposed to do and know how to do it. And I am also thinking of a new career. I've started a business, and now I'm spending the bulk of my free time on philanthropic kinds of things, and I split my time between my business and my philanthropy. I love what I'm doing. I just wish I could live longer, and I wish I'd started this earlier. And I encourage all of you to think back, when you go back home, what you can do to make the world a slightly better place, your society, and not make it an afterthought, and make sure that you instill in your children the sense that they have some obligation to take advantage of their privileged situation and do something to make the world a slightly better place. And in my new career, I've decided that what I'm going to do is take advantage of another skill that I found I had. Carlyle recently bought a company called Beats, and we sold it not long ago to Apple, but the Beats was started by a rapper. His name was Dr. Dre. Some of you may have heard of him. He was a very famous rapper, still is. And I decided that I might take up rapping myself. Now, take a look at this video. You'll see me doing some rap. Hello? Hello? Is this thing on? You know, Dr. Dre is an incredible businessman and artist, and he even inspired me to write my own rap.
Let's hear it.
Takes a lot of brains to do what we do. Looking for a way to make some dough for you. Energy, commodity, we do it all. So pick up the phone and give us a call. Corporate mezzanine, private equity, Carlyle Group is the place to be. We're global, we're mobile, we're aiming to please. Only goal in mind, server LPs. LPs, LPs, server LPs. LPs, LPs, server LPs. LPs, LPs, server LPs. LPs.
I haven't done anything like this really since my bar mitzvah. So, in truth, that took a long time to do. They had me go to the studio. They said it would take 5 minutes to do this. They hired a young African-American rap person in Washington, D.C., and he was going to teach me how to do this. It was supposed to take 5 minutes. 4.5 hours later, he said, Mr. Rubenstein, you are the whitest man I've ever met. Thank you very much.